On my way to cram school through a long tunnel rumored to be haunted, I found a pair of blood-red high heels, and when I passed by again, a sad-looking middle-aged woman stood beside them. I'm from the countryside. In fact, my family home lies just behind the shadow of a tall mountain. The land that the mountain stands on is actually owned by my grandfather. Our family have always been happy to allow villagers to use the land as long as a small portion of their profits are shared with us. By that I mean the grounds are free to walk, the fields are free to work, and the game is free to hunt. To me, that doesn't seem like that much of a bad deal, due to my family's history of being somewhat more than kind with this arrangement. We have been beset by thieves over the years since our family wanted to make sure we continued this community spirit. The elder men in my family offered to patrol the mountain ranges at night in search of thieves. My family would often remind me of areas on the mountain range that would be dangerous at night. In their words, it was for adults only, the adult world. No children allowed. It didn't stop me and my friends exploring, though we found out pretty quickly why the adults didn't want us to play in those areas. For one, the wildlife, but more realistically, there was a pretty deep cave, and to us kids that cave was one of our favorite playgrounds. Felt like it was ours. So that leads me to this experience I had when I was a kid, which I'm so that will live with me for the rest of my days. I was playing in the forbidden areas of the mountain range like normal in the cave. All of a sudden I had the urge to pee, so I decided to head out and do it behind a tree. We were usually nervous about being in places where we were explicitly told not to play in, but being caught peeing out there, well, that really gave me the willies, if you'll pardon the expression. I was basically double scared of being caught. I kept looking around to make sure that the coast was clear, but then as I was midstream, I saw someone. There was a stranger walking up towards the cave. He was down by the river. I shot back behind the tree. I didn't even have a chance to pull my pants up. He was a middle-aged guy by the look of it, and I didn't know that man. I hadn't ever seen him before. I knew everyone who was permitted to use the mountain range. It wasn't a big village. My family had been talking about someone who had been stealing mushrooms, and that may sound trivial, but some of these mushrooms that we grew, they could fetch a pretty price. It made sense that this stranger could be the thief everyone was talking about. He was carrying a backpack and he was clearly on the lookout for something. If this was the thief that my family was so worried about, then I didn't want to be seen by him. I stayed as still as possible out of sight in the trees and bushes. I felt like such an idiot. This was exactly what my parents had warned me about. I watched the stranger. It looked like he was looking for something and he was being cautious. I kept an eye on him to make sure he didn't spot me or try to come close. I mean, I had no plan if he did come close. I was just too scared to take my eyes off of him. I watched him for a while, and then I noticed someone approaching from behind him. I knew who was approaching very well. He was my uncle. He approached the stranger. My uncle was holding a shovel. He stopped the guy and it looked like those two were in conversation. I was too far away to make out anything that they were saying, though my uncle seemed to be admonishing the gun guy, giving him a real telling off. You know, the stranger, or should I say thief, took off his backpack at what looked to be the order of my uncle. My uncle then snatched the thief's backpack. He opened it and then I saw my uncle get very angry. Then something happened that I didn't think would ever be a possibility. My uncle smacked the fay across the back of the head with the shovel. The thief went limp and just fell flat on his face in the dirt. My uncle then dragged the stranger into the river and watched as his lifeless body bed downstream. My uncle then walked off in the opposite direction. Like nothing happened. That scared the hell out of me. My uncle was the younger of the two brothers, the elder being my dad and man. My uncle had my sides aching so many times when I was a kid. He was hilarious, but in that moment he didn't look anything like himself. He looked so cold and expressionless. It gets worse because he came around to our house for dinner that night and I had to sit opposite him, knowing what I knew. He was smiling and joking as usual. It was as if nothing had happened. At one point he looked at me right in the eyes and I thought to myself for a brief second, while he and my father spoke about trespasses on the mountain range. Do you know? The thief didn't ever come back. I'm not sure what happened to him, but I can guess based on what I saw if he did manage to get away. He never went to the police or anything. I learned about the adult world that they had warned me about with their off-limit areas that day. It was a really scary experience, and I haven't been able to look at my uncle the same way since this happened when I was in my third year of junior high school. We had some entrance exams coming up at school, and my parents expected me to get the best grades possible. So I was enrolled into a cram school. Cram school is basically just school. After school, you go to a specific class to focus on specific topics. It's pretty dull and it makes the day feel super long. So after school finishes, I make my way to CR school, and we lived in a really rural area, so the cram schools weren't exactly close to my school. In order to get there, I had to go through this long dark tunnel. That was pretty creepy even in summer, but I lived in an elevated area a little ways up in the mountains, so tunnels were fairly common. My parents said that when they were my age, they got themselves to their lessons and back and expected me to do the same. So from a young age I was pretty active because of this. My friends at school said that the tunnel was an active spot for ghosts, and like I said, the tunnel was creepy, but it wasn't as if I was scared of anything paranormal. I didn't really believe in ghosts, but that all changed on the day that this experience took place. That day I headed to my cram school lesson as normal after my regular classes. I entered the tunnel. It was pretty long and it was always dark in there even during the day. That day though I felt a chill at my back despite there being no breeze. I thought that I might be catching a cold or something, so I didn't pay it much mind. I just tried to hurry to get myself a little warmer. Something caught my eye. I said it was dark in the tunnel, but it wasn't exactly pitch black. That's how I noticed something lying on the floor. There were two objects and they were bright red. Who there in the tunnel was a bright red pair of shoes. They were high heel ones as well, and I was a little girl at the time growing into a teen. I was instantly drawn to them. I would have stopped and looked at them, maybe even picked them up if I had the time, but my volleyball practice had overrun at school, making me late for my CRI school lesson while I was at crim school. I couldn't focus on my lesson because I couldn't get those shoes out of my head. I mean, why were they there? Did someone walk into the tunnel wearing them, and then I don't know, something happened and they just left without their shoes? Was someone tired of wearing them and just ditched them? I didn't know why they were so alluring to me. I didn't walk back through the tunnel because my mother came to pick me up. This was usual, and that was fine because I didn't like the idea of walking home through that tunnel in the dark, and it got dark in winter pretty early in my town. The following day was a Saturday and I was out playing with a friend. I asked her if she wanted to come with me to the tunnel to see if those beautiful shoes were still there. She wouldn't go, though she was too scared to go into that tunnel, even though it was a really bright day. So later I decided to go by myself, but I couldn't find the shoes. I didn't exactly look hard though, because once again I was running late. Are you noticing a theme with my sense of timekeeping? I guess that the owner of those shoes might have come back and picked them up, or someone else could have swiped them. It was a bummer, but I made a mental note to double check on Monday on my way to my lessons. Monday rolled around and after school I was approaching the tunnel once again. Just before the tunnel there was a bend in the road. There was a guardrail hugging the border of the road. Just there I saw something go over the edge, something big. It was so weird though because it was like a shadow. A shadow just fell off the edge. Like I said, we lived up in the mountains. If something goes off the edge, then it's really bad news, definitely fatal, as it is a long way down to the jagged rocks below. Not really understanding what I saw and potentially being too young to process it, I just ran into the tunnel. I wanted to get to the adults at my lesson to tell them about it. And as I was rushing through the tunnel, something caught my eye. There were two red objects neatly stacked side by side on the ground ahead. The red shoes were back. I couldn't help but gasp or scream. I can't remember exactly. I stood there stunned, staring at them. And then I looked up a little and I saw something which made me feel as if my little heart stopped. There was a woman stood there in the tunnel, only she didn't look real. She looked like she was a memory, and I can't explain that in any other way than what I just said. She wasn't there, but she was there. She looked to be about 40 years old. She stood there glaring at me and she had the saddest looking expression on her face. She looked so lonely and so desolate. I was so shocked and scared by what I saw that I couldn't even scream. I just ran right out of the tunnel. I looked behind me once the woman wasn't following me. She just stood there glaring at me with those sunken eyes and her hunched, defeated posture. I ran into a convenience store and I must have been crying and sobbing because I caused such a fuss when I got there. They called my parents after I gave them my number, and I didn't go to crime school that day. I have never been so terrified in all my life. In fact, I never walked through that tunnel again to my lessons. I was shown a different route. I think when I was about 18 or 19, my mom told me that there had been more than a few individuals that had chosen to end things at that bend in the road. I'm not sure. Maybe because it's so secluded there, and the tunnel provides a great place to contemplate things. I'm guessing that's why I saw the shoes there. I wonder if anyone else has had a similar experience to mine. I mean, I hope that they haven't because it was horrible, but I do wonder. Hi Jay. Here you may be wondering why someone would remove their shoes before ending things. On their own terms, this seems to be somewhat of a common trait in Japan, and I found the following few points from an article on the Japan Times website, which I will link in the description. Possible theories as to why someone may remove their shoes before ending things, as not to carry dirt from this world into the next, to indicate that the death was in fact on their terms and not some kind of accident or at the hands of another, to increase the chances of their body being found. In the past, samurai have been known to do things like that too, and because it's been popularized in TV and dramas, the image of a pair of shoes on a cliff or on a roof on a building, there's something that's prevalent. It's better to remove one's shoes than have them come off during the fall and land in some embarrassingly untidy way, apparently, and finally, because they don't want their soul to stay grounded on earth. I heard something weird on the way home from school. For context's sake, I should say that my school is literally situated in the middle of nowhere. What I mean by that is that it would be fair to say that I live in a rural area. There is a river just a little ways behind my school. It's not a particularly deep river. It also backs onto our family home. I would say that it's no more than a meter deep and about 3 m wide. That said, that river can be pretty dangerous after a flash flood or a typhoon. In some cases, the river can become as deep as 4 m and as wide as 6. The reason why this river suddenly grows in size is due to a similar-sized river just upstream. There is a merging point, and when the rainfall is heavy, everything just gets swept downstream. It was a bit of a concern for me because our family home wasn't that far away from that river, like I said. That being said, though, there is a dam downstream too, so the water just kind of accumulates there until it's dealt with. This causes flooding. So naturally, in my small town, I was always warned of the dangers of the river. I was always warned of the dangers of that river. So, as you might have suspected, this story involves that river. On a night of heavy rainfall, not long after it started to rain, the winds picked up. A typhoon approached and school was off for the following day. The rain was really heavy. Kept me up half the night. I woke up at different intervals. I was worried too. You know, we lived in a pretty tight-knit community. A lot of my friends' houses could be affected, not to mention some of my elderly family members. I think that it was about 4:00 a.m. when the heavy rain finally began to slow down. Well, a little. It was replaced by a light mist. I thought for some reason that it would be on me to go out and check how high the water level was. The rain was weak and the night seemed still, but as I approached the river I heard a sound other than the rapid flowing water. There was an odd gurgling noise. I thought that it was just some kind of farming machine at first, like some kind of drainage system kicking in, but as I got closer to the river it sounded less and less mechanical to me. I was curious, but I have to say a bit scared too. It was odd to be out there in the mud in the middle of the night. All I have to say is that I'm grateful that I had the wherewithal to put on my Wellington boots coat and bring a flashlight. I wanted to get to the edge of the river, well near the edge. I didn't want to put myself in danger. I wanted to get close enough to be able to tell my dad and my grandpa the level I saw the water at. I don't know why I wanted that at the time. I guess I just wanted to show how much of a big boy I had become, so like I say, I got close to the river mouth, and that was when that noise I heard before the gurgling one became a lot clearer. I stared out at the water for a while. I found it oddly calming to watch. I stood there not thinking about anything in particular, and then I turned to leave. A second or so after I turned to leave, I heard a voice call out. I spun around in the dark and aimed to my flashlight in the general direction I thought I'd heard that voice coming from, but all that I could see was fast-moving, dark, muddy water. Thinking that it was nothing but an auditory hallucination, I turned to leave again, and then I heard the same voice, as clear as a bell, call out to me. Well, I guess to anyone it said, "Hey." Once again I spun around. I shone my flashlight all over the surrounding woods this time, and I thought at that point it could have been an animal that I had hurt. All that I could see was darkness, though just dark leafless trees stood in silent watch of the rushing water. I thought to myself that there would be no way that I could have hurt a person out. There was just no way. I guess that I was probably overtired, but I would be lying if I said that I wasn't scared. I was young when this happened and I was creeped out. I wanted to get back home as soon as possible, so I quick walked as not to slip. I couldn't have ran even if I wanted to, and believe me, I wanted to. I heard that voice one more time before I got home, and I heard it the clearest that time. It sounded like someone shouted out, "Hey, once more." It didn't stop me from heading inside, but I lay in my bed until the sun rose that night, trying to figure out if what I heard was the voice of a man and not that of a beast. The reason why I mention this is because it's something that has weighed heavily on my heart. Sure, a story about a kid going out to a river, just outside of the property lines of his family home, isn't really anything to report on, right? Well, those shouts of hey or whatever I heard might not have been my imagination. Actually, a body was found downstream after the typhoon, and it scares me. It really terrifies me that I was in the right place at the right time and I was hearing a guy call out for help, and I was too scared to react to a guy who might have been in that river for a long time. If I'd have been able to help, I would have. But the river looked completely empty to me. I curse myself and I second-guess myself all the time these days. Am I to blame? This happened during the summer of 1977. It was either late July or early August. I was hiking with 3 friends of mine. Back in those days, I was an avid mountain hiker. We were on a 3,000 m hiking course called the Ginza, which is part of the Japanese Alps. That hike isn't for the faint-hearted, so I just want to briefly describe it for you. The course duration should take about 4 nights and 5 days. However, if you are a fast hiker, it is possible to do it in 3 nights. That wasn't the case for us though, plus this duration doesn't take the weather into consideration. It's highly recommended that you have 1 extra night in your schedule to adapt to changes in the weather. Bat 8 Ridgeline is well known for its steepness. However, the trail is well maintained. The advice is to walk at a steady pace, especially at the beginning of hiking. This should help you avoid overexhaustion. On the second night, we were set to be staying at Nuchi-Goria, which is a mountain hut. Hi Jay, here I will leave a link to the exact hut in the description and throw up a screenshot of the website. Now just for context, imagine them there. Back to the story. The hut was pretty empty at the time. It had lights that you generated yourself and a TV, and I have to say the food was very nice. I bet that it's changed a bit nowadays. Overall, it was very nice. All the lights were out by 9:00 p.m. Like my group, the other hikers probably were exhausted or eager to get an early start at hiking for the full morning. There were about 3 others in there with us in this big open room. I crawled into the thin bedding when the lights went out and I got ready for sleep. My friends and I were sleeping close together to share some warmth. The hut was dark, but it wasn't silent. There was some light snoring and there was another sound. Someone was listening to a radio at a low volume. It was tuned to this fuzzy station and it would kind of volume spike on occasion. I wanted to ignore it, but I couldn't. It was kind of irritating. I didn't say anything, though I just figured whoever was listening to it would shut it off soon. The radio wasn't turned off, though it was getting later and later and I wanted to sleep because we had a lot of ground to cover the following day. So I got up and went to former staff member. The staff member came with me back into the sleeping area, and we went in search of the owner of the radio to ask them to turn it off, because the staff member was pacing around. It piqued the interest of some of the others and before long everyone was awake. We weren't able to find the owner of that radio, though no one came forward to say it was theirs. So then the staff member went over to the area where we all stored our gear, and he found out that the radio was playing in someone's backpack. Once again, no one came forward to say it was their radio or their backpack. So the staff member unzipped the bag and took the radio out and turned it off. We stood there a little confused and then the staff member broke the silence. He said that he thought he knew the owner of that bag. The guy who owned the bag had arrived with a load of gear and seemed well prepared. But come morning the guest had disappeared. The staff member believed that he left in the middle of the night. The route down from the mountain hut would take longer than a day. It is unknown why the owner of the radio and the bag left without his belongings or even a coat. The staff member had to look. The staff member had a look on his face that seemed to say I've seen this before. So I asked him what he thought happened to the owner of the radio, and he replied with the following: there is no course that could get him down, not aero in one day. Just can't happen even in the summer. It would be considered suicidal. If you catch my drift, if you understand what I'm trying to tell you, I guess we all thought that it was kind of weird that the radio suddenly turned on by itself, but as we spoke about it, we put it down to perhaps the bag shifting or someone nudging it when they added their bag to the pile. It sounded like a coincidence at first, but something about the fragments I heard in the darkness of that hut at the summit of that lonely mountain made me think otherwise. I heard something come across on that radio and those words stuck with me. They seem to be a call from beyond our plane of reality, and it shivers up my spine. Just thinking back on it, I heard the words "I'm here." I am not sure if that meant he was someplace else or still here in our realm. I think I also heard the name of a new religious group, and that scared me too. I think about the owner of that radio now and then, and I can't help but constantly wonder about what led him to leave the hut in the middle of the night and what led up to his final moments. Perhaps he was seeking something, or perhaps he was being influenced by someone. I wonder if more communications would have come through if we just left that radio on E.